Okay, you gentlemen ready?
Yepper.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last night of workshops for the music and worship in smaller churches. I'm Amelia Price. I'm your facilitator for the evening. And I would like to center us with a brief prayer. Will you pray with me? Gracious and holy God, we are coming together to look at that important piece of worship called music and how we worship you in our various settings. Center us, gracious God, on this beautiful evening where the sun is filtering through the leaves and the air is cool, that we can hear a new way and think of new ways to worship you in our various settings. We lift our presenters to you and pray, gracious God, for the time that is before us. And we pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
We are here for music and worship in smaller congregation. Our presenters are Jeffrey Clouser, Eric Dundore, and Scott Siciliano. Jeffrey is the music coordinator at St. Mark's, Lebanon. Eric is the minister of music at St. Paul's, Mechanicsburg. And the Reverend Scott Siciliano is minister of worship and arts at Colonial Park, Harrisburg. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing your expertise. This is a sacred space. Music is a sacred thing. And we are here to study and to learn, to hear new perspectives, to hear all the voices that wish to speak. Let's keep this place sacred and special as we come together. Gentlemen, as they say, you are on.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start. Thank you for the introduction, Amelia. It's wonderful to see many familiar faces of friends and colleagues and many people I haven't gotten to meet before. Welcome. Just want to begin by debunking a couple of myths that are in danger of clouding our conversation this evening. Amelia said we are here to share our expertise. I think I can speak on behalf of myself and Eric and Jeffrey in saying none of us are truly experts on this. Also, just to get it out in the open, as the three of us met a few weeks ago to discuss, what direction do we want to take this question of, how to do music in small churches. What we don't want this discussion to be is formulaic, because honestly, there isn't a set formula to this conversation, to this question. And the reason for that is a very obvious one. God created each individual church to be unique. And so every congregation, every location, every congregational culture is going to be unique. And so if there is one thing that we can share with you this evening in terms of, what is something that's absolutely essential, is to ask yourselves the question as a congregation, what is your identity? And hopefully you've already done that. Perhaps you've done that recently. Perhaps you haven't done it in a while. But that really is key, because your music culture in your church should align with your culture. There has been this idea circulating for a long time now that, if a mainline church wants to grow, we have to have X. So we have to have contemporary music. We have to have, more youth. The list goes on. And I'm not saying any of those things aren't helpful. Obviously they are, but none of them are going to be deal breakers. I have been to traditional churches that did contemporary music very poorly, and it was painful. I've also been to traditional churches that did traditional music very poorly, and it was painful, and vice versa. And so, what we will talk about more tonight is the process of defining and discerning what your congregational gifts are. Who are the people that you have in your congregation? What are their talents? Where are areas where you may be missing a certain talent? And what are the resources available to be able to fill that gap, if possible? There are certain things that can be done. We all know, especially when it comes to the organ, I, as an organist, am part of a dying breed. There are less and less of us, and more churches searching for organists, which unfortunately has made the field extremely competitive. And it's not unfortunate for me, but it's certainly unfortunate for the local church, because it's gotten much harder to find qualified musicians to lead worship. We're going to put all of those things aside for a second and go back to that first thing of, as a church, if we ask ourselves, who are we? What are the necessary parts of that? The first is to define your core values. That is an essential part of discerning your identity. Many of you probably know, a number of years ago, Colonial Park, my home church here in Harrisburg, went through a very, very hard time. It was our first effort to educate the congregation and move toward becoming an open and affirming church. It literally split our congregation in half. It was very, very painful. It took us several years to bounce back from that. What I can say is that our congregation is stronger than it has ever been, at least in known memory. May not be as big as it once was, but spiritually, we are very strong. There is one very specific process that helped us to get there. And that was a visioning process that we did. Tom Webster, who was our associate conference minister at the time, helped us through that. But a group from the church comprised of lay people of very different views came together, and they discerned for almost a year and a half this vision and direction for our church. There were triads that formed within the congregation, so the congregation very much had input in this process. But the final result was this very powerful yet very simple mission statement for our church. We exist to listen, to love, and to restore hope and community to all God's children. Those are our three core values. And I'll tell you, that was something that virtually every person in this church could get behind. Why is that important? Because then if we apply that to our church culture and the way we do things, everything in this church, be it policy, be it finances, be it staff relations, be it theology, be it worship, be it music, everything is run through that funnel. Does it help us to learn how to listen to the Holy Spirit, to listen to each other, to listen to the needs of the community, to love one another, to support one another? And is it something that restores hope for us? Yes, but also hope for this community in this world, which we all know is so fractured. If I translate that now to our worship culture, we've got a very diverse congregation. We used to have 2 services pre-pandemic. The earlier service was the smaller of the groups, and it was a very traditional service. The organ was used for pretty much everything. The liturgy was much more fixed. Our later service was a more blended service where we intentionally did a number of different music styles. After coming through the pandemic and finally reaching the point where we felt it was safe to meet in person again, It no longer was viable for us to be heating this gargantuan building for 2 services. And so we've come together. The model that was chosen was the blended service. And the reason that was chosen is to embrace those core values and to celebrate and encourage diversity. And what I have seen and heard and felt in our congregation is much more of a collaborative spirit in worship. That, I may come to worship and really like the organ and traditional hymns. And, on one week, we might sing 2 or 3 traditional hymns, and 1 or 2 contemporary songs that I don't care for, or a song in another language that I really don't care for. But there's going to be that 1 or 2 songs or elements that really speak to me. And I can hold that and value that while also respecting that the person next to me may not care for those same elements that I care for, but they're really moved by this other element. And if I can look at them and understand that, then I can celebrate that. And it means a little bit more to me. And so that collaborative spirit helps us to join together. And music can be a wonderful catalyst for that. Music is the one language that is universal. It's the language that we can all speak. Sometimes we speak a little bit differently. I suppose you could use the metaphor of speaking in different dialects. And yet music touches us all. And so as a congregation is discerning its identity, these various questions of who are we? Why are we here? What is it that we do well? All of that should be translated to this question of how do you do music and worship in your congregation? Because regardless of whether something is done quote unquote well by artistic standards, isn't always going to matter to a guest visiting your church. Study after study has shown that the thing that most visitors to churches are looking for most isn't a particular style, isn't necessarily a particular congregation size. They want to know whether you believe what you say you believe. And if a congregation is just going through the motions and there isn't a sense of strong unity or spiritual connection, it can be the best worship service in the world, and it's going to feel like stale white bread, because that energy and that sense of meaning aren't going to be there. You can have a group of 10 people, and if those people are connected and they're deeply rooted in their faith and their spirituality, and they're doing their best and really connecting with the service, that's going to speak volumes. And most people, regardless of what their own tastes are really going to be drawn to that. Because as Christians, I think we can all get around the belief that, we all have something that the world needs. And our job as the church is to share that, to promote that, to help people connect with that. So, more than anything else, be true to yourselves. God has given you specific gifts as a congregation, as a pastor leading a congregation. And so, by throwing some sort of set formula together, Jeff and Eric and I were saying that actually can run the risk of losing sight of these really important questions. And all that gets us to is a disconnect. So I'm going to stop there for now and open it up the floor to my colleagues. These are all things that we're going to come back to throughout the conversation. We will have a lengthy time for Q&A, but at this point, we're going to continue to go through these bullet points that you hopefully received from Paul.
All right, I had to unmute myself. Thanks, Scott, for that introduction. It's very good. You touched on something that I wanted to follow up on when you had mentioned the fact about creating an intergenerational space where we all have to become unified as a church family and honor and respect those traditions. In a former context of mine, we had an issue where the church was becoming very divisive between the two services. And I remember my pastor at the time speaking to this in one of his sermons, and I just thought I'd share this with everybody because I thought it was a very good quote. This was from Pastor Dennis Lohr's sermon on May 7th in 2017. He said, there are congregations that have decided to do nothing but traditional worship. And what that means is they refuse to do worship in any way other than what is meaningful to their older generations. There are congregations that have decided to do nothing but contemporary worship. What that means is they refuse to do worship in any way other than what is meaningful to their younger generations. In our context, we tried to do one of each, but splitting us up in the long run was not healthy for the congregation as a whole. It caused stress, divisions, but even worse, it fostered attitudes of selfishness, protectionism, and disregard. Now we made a different choice, one that I think is harder, that requires openness and tolerance and patience, or better yet, a belief that when we learn to value and appreciate what each has to offer, we are stronger and better and richer and more faithful. Because in the end, we are left to fulfill the verse from Psalm 145. One generation shall laud your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. So I just thought I would follow up with that because I thought this was some important words. And I'm actually going to be talking to intergenerational worship actually in the next section. I kind of titled this this next section as hospitality, because I think hospitality is what we want to do when we think of enhancing worship. So I'm just going to go through these bullet points and share some things that I pulled out of these bullet points that I think are worth mentioning. There in the first bullet point, we're talking about being more inclusive on various levels. And when I think about inclusive, I think about the hospitality we offer to those who are in the church, not only currently in the church, but those who visit our church, and some of the things we can do in those aspects. And I think one important thing churches can do is they can actually do a self-audit. And with some of these things that I might be suggesting, to see how hospitable they may be in their worship, in welcoming those who aren't as familiar with that worship context, especially if they're visiting for the first time. Some places you might want to start with might be your worship guides. Some of you might refer to them as bulletins. I prefer the term worship guide because that's actually what that does. It guides you through worship in a printed format. Some contexts may choose to use monitors and put some things up on monitors. And one thing monitors or screens help you do is it kind of helps you pull everybody's head up out of these worship guides and kind of looking at each other and in community with each other. So there's a pro to that, as well as also, some people like to see the music both in print and on the monitor. So they're not always looking down, but they're looking up too. So that puts us all in kind of prayer with each other in that worship setting, because we're all kind of looking at each other. So some ways of making a more welcome atmosphere you might see on there, offering materials that might be available to those who need larger print, or those who need some hearing assistance. You want your worship space to communicate that your worship actually happens here, but you also want to let people know what kind of worship actually takes place there. So what are they seeing when they enter your worship space? Are there people greeting them there, welcoming them there, helping them get to where they need to in the church? Is there signage, like it states there in that one bulletin point? Is it clear? Is it readable? Are we accessible to everybody that enters the church as they come in to the building? Are there ways to get in? Sometimes I see front doors to a church, but that's not necessarily where people enter anymore. They might have had an addition on, and that's where everybody enters through an addition that's like a welcome center right now. So some of those things that you want to think about as far as a welcoming space that you create. Another way to be hospitable and enhance your worship would be to make your worship more sensory and allow your congregation to participate more. And what I mean from that is, what do you do with your worship space? How do you arrange it? How does it look visually to the people? Do you create like some sort of set or design, or do you add some sort of color or banners, or use fabric, or for like when you do communion, do you use a basin with water and that sort of thing? Sensory, anything people could touch or see or hear. What type of music is there, or what are they singing around them? One good resource that I'm not sure is on one of the resource pages that I shared with Paul is Dr. Marcia McPhee, and she coordinates or runs what's called the Worship Design Studio. And I think that has a lot of good resources in it that help congregations make things more participatory. And you could easily do a Google search on that. And she also designs actually worship services, but you can actually pull out certain elements from that and make them adaptable to your context. So you don't have to use her things word for word when you're doing that. Let's see here.
Jeff,
One thing I forgot to mention, that, and when I going back to hospitality, sorry about that. Why we and the worship guides and welcoming everybody, while you might know the motions of your worship by heart, I think most of us know in our context what comes next, how the worship flows, and knowing things by heart helps us focus our attention on the gospel and on God. We have to keep in mind that there are people who might be visiting. And so keep in mind that you might want to treat every Sunday as if it's a new experience, although it might not be new to you. It might be new to somebody who's there for the first time. So if there's certain things you're going to be doing in the liturgy, in your worship context, you might want to include those things in your worship guides or on your screens or monitors if you use those things. Simply just stating like how you say the Lord's Prayer. Do you say sins or do you say debtors? That sort of thing. So keep that in mind. One of the other bulletin points there we have is create an intentional worship space. Being more dramatic and theatrical and offer threshold moments. And kind of what I mean by that is you want the service to encourage theological inquiry, but you also want to develop, you also want the dialogue between the biblical world and what the worshiper's world is. So try to incorporate those two so people can go out and live that faith. So, and then the last bulletin point there, we're talking about the creative worship planning team. And I know that's something that has started in my prior context I was in, and it's something that Eric Dundore is doing in his current context. So he may want to speak more to that. And lastly, I would just state that when you're looking at your litanies and incorporating songs, you want to make sure that you incorporate the songs and the litanies from a larger church community. And so just to foster a commitment to unity and solidarity. And I'll probably speak more to that in the next section when we start talking about specific things you can do musically within your context. So that's all I have to say in that section right there. And I'll pass it off to my next colleague.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Still looking at this this sheet that we have developed. I wanted to add something about Marcia McPhee, that she talks about the three basic tenets of focuses of your worship being verbal, the three V's, I should say, verbal, visual, and visceral. Okay, and trying to create a worship setting that has, yes, the words that we need to hear and share and sing and meditate upon, but also the visual, something that visual learners, for example, can identify with and take note to, and will really add to what is being said verbally. And then third, visceral, something that sparks the emotion, that causes you to really delve deeply and think hard about what it is that is being said and that you see. So those three things, Marcia McPhee has always been pushing those, and her books and resources are not cheap, no, but they are very useful in some cases. The last bullet in that section that Jeff was talking about, we have started at St. Paul's here in Mechanicsburg. We've started a creative worship planning team. We have a worship committee that meets every so often to talk about what's upcoming, what we've done in the past, how we can celebrate certain time periods, and what we need to do to make our worship more relevant and more useful to the congregation, and to make decisions and keep track of all those things that need to be done when it comes to what happens in the sanctuary in worship. But we've created a smaller group called the Creative Worship Planning Team to address individual Sundays, to talk about what is the scripture, what is the scripture saying, what's our focus for that Sunday, what are we working on when it comes to then the visual, or the sights and smells and sounds and the music and so forth. How can we coordinate all that and make it happen? And it seems to have sparked quite an interest in making our worship again more relevant, more interesting, more friendly, more hospitable, and it really has brought some of us who do the music and worship here in our church closer together. It includes our pastor and our associate pastor, the director of youth, Alyssa, and another former pastor that is here, two other former pastors that are here, and myself and my wife, who does the small children's choir here. And so it's a group of 5 or 6 that get together and talk about these things and really plan the specifics of what things are going to sound like or look like, and how they're going to flow. So I just wanted to address that. It's been a great help for us and been very exciting, and brought worship back to the fore in what we do here at the church. This third section, music, how can we equip our congregations to sing in the 21st century, is a specific musical goal that has a question that has been asked by the Hymn Society of America, by the UCCMA, by a number of different organizations. What can we do to allow our congregations to feel more comfortable singing, to feel more comfortable participating in worship, and then therefore allowing them to feel like they're a part of things and much more involved in what's happening. It says, have your hymnody and anthems reflect your core values and mission. Again, you have to decide first off what it is that you want to use, what you want to have as your core values. What is your vision? What is your mission? What are your extended missions out into the community? What is it that you want the congregation to be thinking about, to be singing about, to be talking about? And that's something that really is important. Use new texts with older hymn tunes. My personal favorite is Carolyn Winfrey Gillette. Carolyn is also a Lebanon Valley College grad along with me, and we enjoy talking to each other. But she has created such a lengthy library of alternative or texts to hymns, that will address many different aspects of theology and justice issues and so forth, and they are to be sung to hymns that are already well known. My congregation has gotten used to singing at least one or two of those every week, and some of the congregation really enjoy them and enjoy the words. The new words speak to them more than maybe the traditional words have in the past. So she's one choice. There are many others. You can Google that and find other persons who are creating different texts. Amanda Eudice Kessler is another person who's really wonderful. Discuss the history and context of favorite hymns and new hymns. Let the congregation know. Print it up on your bulletin or your worship guide or your screen or whatever it would happen to be, or have it be a part of the lesson or a part of the sermon or whatever it happens to be. Use music that addresses current concerns and community happenings. Again, obviously, for some of us, this is Pride Month, or we have our ONA anniversary Sunday coming up. Next Sunday is Juneteenth, and we have a service based on the Juneteenth situation, the historical situation of Juneteenth, and how it relates to how we live in the community these days. So those kinds of things are useful to making church relevant in the lives of your congregation. Purposeful welcome and invitational hospitality songs. There are some of those. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Maybe my colleagues can. But things that are going to make people feel good about their presence, especially new people, but also people who've been there for 50 plus years as well. You want people to feel good about what it is that they're singing, to allow them to sing songs that they know from the past, and also delve into some new things that in the future that they may not think that they have the interest in, but it ends up that they do. Use more fun pieces and multicultural pieces. Siahamba, the Tumamina, all kinds of different pieces that you can find in the New Century Hymnal and as resources out there on the web. Songs that in supplemental hymnals or in other songbooks or whatever that you can use with the congregation to make them or to allow them to enjoy. When we do Siahamba every so often at St. Paul's, we do drums with it, and we do djembes and tubanos and so forth. We also we stand and we clap and we sway and we have a grand time. And some people enjoy that and some people don't, and that's okay. They participate to the extent that they wish to do that. But something that makes people think that singing is not a drudgery, that singing is not an expected thing that we have to get through. We have to get through that hymn. Oh my goodness, it's hymn time again. Do we have to do that? No, enjoy it. Have a good time. Think about the words. Envelop yourself in that music. Yes, and to rejoice and come in. Thank you, Nora. That is a wonderful one. We use that as an introit at our church. God welcomes all. Thank you. Yeah, all kinds of things in the chat. That's great. Consider different music styles. Obviously, we're comfortable with what we're comfortable with. I was never really overly comfortable with more contemporary styles, but then of course I did Mad Camp at Hartman Center for many years, and boy, that broke me of that. And raised as a classical musician, but get comfy with contemporary styles, get comfy with gospel styles, get comfy with you name it. The sky's the limit there. Okay. The more styles you can use, the more people you can reach and touch. Okay. check out online performances to see and hear how it's done. You know, if you're not quite sure how this is supposed to sound, go hear somebody do it. And there are a lot of those online. I wish there were even more, but you know, go out there and hear the different choirs do their thing, or the different congregations do their thing, or whatever it happens to be. It's all there for you. Try a more contemporary song with the congregation sometime. We did Mary Did You Know as a Advent hymn a few times. You know, that's not overly contemporary, but it's something different from the hymnal, so there you have it. More of the contemporary kinds of thing, the Gettys and the Michael W. Smiths and the, you know, whoever your people are that you enjoy. Get out in front and lead them as a choir director, as a church musician, as even a pastor. Get out if you're comfortable. Get out and in front and lead and encourage them to sing, clap and move. Use some from the choir to do it with you. You know, have them stand up front with you and do it, or stand around the edges of the congregation and sing. Especially if you're going to do something new. You know, you have all kinds of resources. You have people who have talents. Have them help with that kind of thing. If you're not using the New Century Hymnal, I would encourage you to use it. You know, even if it's just using pieces out of it, but you know, it's a controversial piece of music in a lot of ways, for some congregations. And I find that hard to take, because we've been using it since it came out. But you know, there's still people that don't want to use the New Century Hymnal for the change of words, for whatever it happens to be. You know, getting away from the German Reformed hymnal or whatever, or the Evangelical and Reformed hymnal or whatever. Also, you know, the Chalice hymnal. There's a book called Hymns of Truth and Light. There's all kinds of different hymnals that might be more conducive to having people sing than the hymnal you're using right now. Give it some thought. Put another hymnal in the hymnal rack in front of a congregation, whatever it happens to be. Enjoy the newness and the change. Don't sell it short. You know, we've always done this. We've always done this. And we're going to continue doing this until the day they plant me in the ground. Don't do that. You know, try some new things, try some different things. Easy for me to say, but try some different things. You'll find that you may actually enjoy what it is that you're doing. Okay. Give any of these suggestions more than one chance to work. Don't say, well, we tried to sing Siahamba in our church and it didn't work so well, so we're never going to try that again. Well, don't necessarily abide by that. Give it a couple shots. Do something different. Try something again. Do it a different way. Add different instruments or something. You know what I'm saying? Be persistent. Consider having a local high school or sister church choir to come and be a part of your service, if that would raise the level of interest and excitement. Have your choirs sing with another choir. Have your group of your quartet of soloists sing with another group. Have some kids from the local high school come, whatever. These were just a number of things that were suggested and might be of interest to you. So, you know, if there's anybody who wants to add to that, Scott or Jeff, or you know, put other ideas in there as well, please go right ahead.
I would just add, Eric, that you want to pick the songs that support and affirm your mission of the church and how the church lives out its faith and its community. So you'll have buy-in to that music and those songs if you're singing the mission and the voice of the church. So
Yeah, all those things that we had said up there toward the top of the page really are the basic fundamental things that need to be addressed if you want your worship, your music program, your church's worship excitement to come alive. It's just something that you have to experience, worship experience to come alive. Those are the things that need to be done. You need to identify and discern. And go ahead.
Another thing that's really important in that vein is it's important for the hymns and songs and worship to fit the service and fit in with the liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for anyone else other than myself. I find plug and play really off-putting when we have certain scriptures and then we have certain liturgy that goes with it, and then we have this hymn thrown in there that seemingly has no connection whatsoever to the service. Can really be off-putting for folks, and it makes the service feel disjointed. Whenever I'm asked to choose songs for a service or to play for a service, I will never choose music until I get the scriptures and at least basic parts of the liturgy. And sometimes that really drives people crazy, to which my response is, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Because worship just flows better that way, because then the music supports the message of the service, which is what it's there for.
Exactly. Can I also add that having something like this prepare book, is it backwards? But the prepare an ecumenical music and worship planner, I use this like as much as I use the Bible, because the Bible is actually in it. The scriptures are listed for each week, and the hymns that fit, and additional hymns and vocal solos and anthems and contemporary music and visual suggestions and theme ideas and all kinds of wonderful resources in this planning book. Is it Abington Press? Yes, Abington Press. Planning, prepare. It's called Prepare. It's a great resource. I use it all the time. I annoy everybody with it.
And in all of this, make sure you tap the talents of your congregation, and everything you do needs to be an invitation. People are not going to do things unless they're invited to do it. Yeah, especially in worship, invite them to stand, invite them to sit down, invite them to clap. People might not inherently know it's okay to do those things. And if you're looking for somebody to do something in worship or just around the church, or whatever needs done, make sure you network, make sure you talk to people. If they can't do it, they may know somebody who does. So try to resource that way.
Yeah, it is difficult sometimes to find the right hymn, but they're there. And again, if you check into new texts, Carolyn Winfrey Gillette, Amanda Kessler, Eudice Kessler, Scott Siciliano. If you check into people who are putting out new texts and new music and so forth, they're out there. They really are, and they can be very friendly, and they can be very thought-provoking, and give a greater emphasis to what's being said in the scripture and the sermon and so forth in the liturgy. Can I also then go to the bottom of the page just very quickly so I don't forget? I said here, don't try to do everything for everyone all the time. Try different things. You're never going to hit everybody all the time with what they might need necessarily. So you just try a lot of different things, and you try and find out what works, and you talk to people like Scott said, and you figure out what it is that touches people, where you get the visceral response. And then at the bottom, please check into the United Church of Christ Musicians Association. This is a commercial. We're taking a moment for commercial. I am on the national board of the UCCMA, and I've become very obnoxious about pushing the UCCMA to local churches, to music directors, to pastors, to worship planners, whatever it happens to be. Jeff's also a member, Scott's a member, and we all find what they do useful. And so we're encouraging you. I put the website there for you to click on. If you don't want to join for a full membership, that we have, if you just want to try it out, they have a free 90-day trial membership that you can go on and see what's happening, what's there. I happen to be the editor of the journal that comes out 3 times a year. Both Jeff and Scott have been contributors to the journal over the years, and we think, well, I think humbly, that we address a lot of things that could be useful in your worship and music careers, your journeys at your specific situation. So that's my commercial. Join the UCCMA. It's there for you.
Yeah, unfortunately, the national setting of the UCC is putting out less and less and less when it comes to aids for worship planning. Don't get me started on that. But the UCCMA really is a treasure within our denomination. We've got a lot of incredible talent and a number of very, very well-known composers that are UCC musicians that are constantly writing and assisting and sharing within the UCCMA organization. So that's a resource that you really can take advantage of. Granted, there are at times some theological differences, but the United Methodist Church also has some really killer worship resources. If you go to their denominational website, they've got a lot of really good liturgical resources as well as musical resources. Eric, I wanted to just rewind for a minute to touch on something that you had said earlier. In the realm of don't try to do everything all at once, that's really important. And most of us have probably already found that out. There's an old saying among pastors that, if you're ticking off at least one person in your church, you're probably doing it right. And if you're not ticking off at least one person in your church, you're probably doing something wrong. It's kind of crass, but that's people are diverse and things aren't necessarily, and I would argue shouldn't look the same all the time. And it's within our animal nature to fear what we don't know, to fear what's familiar. And so don't be intimidated by that. There's going to be some pushback from trying new things or trying new songs or trying different resources. And that's natural. Keep doing it, because when that change, even those little microcosmic changes, one thing at a time, when they're done with intention, and if somebody says, well, why did we do that? And, someone from the planning team or the pastor can say, well, this is why we did that. It really connected to the scripture. It really connected to this part of the sermon. Sometimes just that explanation is enough. Transparency is also really important. And that's one area where the worship planning team is really vital, because it gives ownership of the design process to the congregation, which frankly is where it belongs. And then it's not just falling back on one person. We all know it's always the pastor's fault. And when there's that extra layer of participation, it really does change how that discussion looks when people are questioning something or struggling to understand. You know, they say the church of your childhood never really leaves you. You know, that was just pointed out to me at LTS today. I bowed when I was going into the chancel, and someone came up to me and they're like, "So I noticed you bowed. That's not a UCC thing." It's not, but it's an Episcopalian thing, and that's the tradition I grew up in. You know, many of us grew up in a church where worship was much more of a spectator sport. But that's not the world we live in anymore. Perhaps it could be argued that, you know, nowadays folks are overstimulated, but younger generations that are in the church or that have left the church or that may hopefully be coming back to the church, that's the world they've grown up in. They have grown up in a multi-sensory world. And so a service that's a spectator sport where there is no visual or artistic or kinesthetic or musical stimulation isn't going to work for them, and is actually going to feel extremely off-putting. And, you know, I hate to use this word, boring. And, you know, the worship should never be boring. And a traditional service doesn't have to be boring if it's well crafted, and the elements really fit together, and it's done with meaning. So anyway, just wanted to add those couple things.
Are there any questions that people want to directly ask at this point?
Eric, there were a number of questions in the chat. I don't know if
Yeah,
you were able to see those.
I've answered a couple of them to the best of my ability. Again, not an expert, just a person with 40 years of experience.
There's
Yeah.
a good one in the chat from Sarah and Emily. What do you do for people who are visually impaired?
Yeah,
Contemporary music is nice, but hard when they can't read the words on the screen or in paper in order to learn.
So I was just typing a response to that. That is a really great question.
yeah,
It's one that doesn't have an easy answer. The most obvious answer, however, is repetition. And I think that's really important whenever we introduce any new musical element. You know, if we sing a new song and then, oh, okay, yeah, we sang a new song, and we don't sing that song again, or we don't sing it again for 8 weeks, then people are relearning it essentially, because either they forgot it or they weren't there on the Sunday that you did it. And so repeating a song is a good way not only to help the congregation to connect with it, but also to establish that sense of meaning. If it is a more complex song lyrically, start with teaching the refrain. Because, you know, if it's a wordy song and people aren't necessarily going to sing the whole thing or don't want to sing the whole thing or can't sing the whole thing, start with the refrain, sing it a few times so that people start to get a feel for it and maybe even learn it by rote. And then even if the cantor or song leader is singing the verses, once you get back to that refrain, then people can get involved again. And it helps to keep the energy of the song moving.
right. We have a gentleman in our church who is visually impaired. He can see if he has the thing very close, the paper or hymnal or whatever, very close to his face. We do a large print version of the worship guide every week. And we also have a set of magnifying glasses that he can use, that anybody can use, along with hearing aids that our church uses within the sound system. So those kinds of things. But what Scott said about repetition is great. We have done hymns of the month or song of the month or whatever, and then you do it every week for the next few weeks, and then it becomes something that people really enjoy singing after a while. So
the other thing is too, if you're planned ahead of time and you know some of the music that's going to be coming up in your worship and they're a regular worshiper, you could always send them the music ahead of time that they can orally hear it and get used to it that way if they can't read it. So it's something I know a friend of mine I used to sing with in choir. That's something he used to appreciate, when the music was sent to him ahead of time, or he could find recordings of it so he could listen to it as well.
Addie asked a question about what can you suggest to encourage people to join the singing choir or the bell choirs. Any of you want to address that?
Something I did with my singing choir, you might find times where people don't want to commit to a regular rehearsal in choir. Every Thursday night rehearsal, sing every Sunday, but they might be open to doing some sort of pickup choir. You have 3 rehearsals and you sing that Sunday, or you have a special choir for just those festival Sundays around the holidays, Christmas or Easter. Or you just encourage them. Personal invitations are always required, or you could just ask them to sit in on a rehearsal to see if it's, just so they could see how it works, how it runs. Some of it's just knowing what happens at rehearsal. And if some people feel like they can't, feel like they need more coaching, you can always do that too. I've done already where I've just coached somebody who wants to sing in the choir individually on an individual basis and just work some things. Or like I've done also, I send out listening links to everything that we're singing so people can learn the music at home. As far as bell choirs, a lot of it was word of mouth, getting my existing bell choir members to invite friends or people that they know. I've also put out the word on Facebook. There's organizations on Facebook that are handbell organizations. I put the word out there. And I also advertised free in the merchandiser, in my local merchandiser, saying I was looking for handbell ringers. And it's amazing some of the response I got, and how many churches have handbells, but they don't use them in their own church anymore, but there's still people who want to play. So if they can find another church in their area, I did the same thing with choir too, as far as singing. So they are more than welcome to play in my church with my bell choir, sing with my choir, even if they're not a member.
We've also had sessions after worship with like a bell choir petting zoo, where they come back and play them, and just ring their hearts to their heart's delight, and get used to that kind of thing. We've had a couple people show interest from that regard as well. Smaller churches may not have people to serve on a worship planning team. Sometimes the pastors are part-time. How's a part-time pastor going to have all this time to do planning, let alone have the expertise in the church to help carry it all out? Well, again, if a pastor is serving more than one church, perhaps they can get together with some people from both churches in one meeting and have both churches doing a lot of the same kinds of things. There should be a music person or two who would be available to meet with the pastor from each church. There might be people who have shown interest in the congregation and in what's happening in worship, or a former pastor or somebody that the pastor can call from outside the church to come and help with that kind of thing. That would be a suggestion. Scott and Jeffrey and I would certainly be willing to talk with people about how to make that happen in an individual situation, or even have a Zoom from an individual church to talk about how to make that work. You know, we got nothing better to do we, Scott and Jeff, huh? I'm the retired one here, so I get to, you know, hang around and do nothing during the day.
That means field all questions to Eric.
Yeah, right. No, but there should be people around who would show an interest in this. I mean, somebody who's a visual artist, somebody who's a painter, somebody who does craft work, somebody who is a great cook, somebody who is somebody who's creative and useful in the congregation to when it comes to sensory things or to expression or to verbal and visual, you know, and visceral. Somebody's who's in theater, you know. So anyway, that would be my incomplete and frustrating answer, I'm sure.
Keep in mind, this is not something you're going to be able to do every Sunday. So,
right.
Scott spoke to that earlier about, it being more of a theatrical production now, church, than it used to be. But there are times.
It doesn't have to be that, though.
No, there are times. There's limits and time and reality, and so.
But even this past Sunday with Pentecost, if you have people who have some ideas about how can we celebrate Pentecost this year? We do it every year. How can we make it special this year? How can we make it stand out? What can we do to approach it in a different way? How can we do something different visually? How can we discuss something about Pentecost that's never been discussed? You know, and so we got together and we did a bunch of different things that seemed to be interesting to the people who were in our congregation this past Sunday. But, you know, it's just one of those things that unless you take the onus about working on it or progressing with it, it's not going to happen. And you're just going to do the same thing over and over again, which is, we're not making a value judgment on. We're just saying that if you want your worship to be more interesting, you may need to have to discuss it, or plan it, get in and make things happen.
Well, I want to sub in, when you said make worship more interesting, yes, but I also want to sub in make worship more relevant,
yes,
more connected, because that perhaps matters more than anything else.
Exactly.
Worship doesn't have to be a production, and we don't have to feel as worship leaders or pastors like we're constantly having to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be that hard or arduous or intimidating. And that's where the internet blesses us. There are so many different resources. Google is your friend. If you type in creative ideas for Pentecost worship, you will get 100 different things. Spend 10 minutes scrolling through and you might get a really cool idea. One thing that we've done in our Pentecost service before is to find a couple of volunteers to read in different languages, so that, in the spirit of Pentecost, where people were speaking different languages over top of one another, if the scripture is read in 3 different languages at the same time, it mimics that, which really helps people to connect with that scripture they've heard 50 times in a new way.
Yep.
And something I simply did this past weekend, and other musicians do the same thing. One of the songs we sang as a choir anthem and a congregation joining us, because it's also really a hymn. I just created a children's percussion ensemble. And so they play percussion along with us while we were singing. And so just something as, simple as that, if you have percussion instruments or can loan them from somebody, just adding that sort of thing to your, that sort of element to your worship from time to time is another way of enhancing what you do.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to the question that Larry Smith posed, because this is really important, and a lot of folks are in this situation. So he said, I serve 2 small congregations. Sorry, Larry, don't want to single you out, but you did share it with everyone, so I will. I serve 2 small congregations, no professional musicians, no choirs, several alternating accompanists with varying levels of talent, and nobody willing to contribute to a worship planning team. What do you have to offer in this setting, which is not common? That's hard, which, it goes back to that initial thing of, this isn't necessarily a formulaic thing. And, it's where the congregation has to be willing, at least in some capacity, to step up to the plate, however they can. And sometimes that's not at all. And, if worship is meeting their needs, worship is meeting their needs. If there is that spirit of collaboration or that desire to grow, sometimes it begins with a conversation. Open it up to the congregation and do an assessment with the group about worship. What do you appreciate about worship? What are you missing in worship? What would you like to see in worship? And allow them then to have that discussion of what can we do to make that possible. If you've got a lot of alternating musicians, maybe, if folks are willing to not have live music one Sunday a month, maybe then those musicians can come together on another Sunday and collaborate, and music can be more special or fuller versus having it every week. And that can be hard because obviously we want it every week, but small churches do only have so many resources, and that's a challenge, and they have to figure out how to use those resources as best as possible. But as pastors, we're not miracle workers. Sometimes our congregations expect us to. Doesn't that set everybody up for disappointment? But there has to be that sense of ownership of the struggle, as well as ownership of the solution within the congregation. That really is essential. So I apologize if that probably didn't answer your question. But yeah, sometimes it just starts with a conversation.
Yeah, and these are some of the, if I can follow up on that, Scott, on a book that I just put in the chat there, Thomas G. Long, Beyond the Worship Wars, Building Vital and Faithful Worship. When it comes to creating this vital and faithful worship in congregations, and what roles do the leadership or pastorate play in this, he suggests the following: that worship renewal requires strong leadership from the pastor, who must take charge in directing the change and implementing the vision. Also realizing that any sort of change that you might want to implement or suggest may cause some conflict, so be prepared for some complaints and graciously lead the church to a significant and new place of worship without, being arrogant about it. Involve the congregation, like we've been talking about, to seek their input and guidance and their vision for what change they want to see. If there's certain people in your church that are kind of natural leaders within the congregation, you know, kind of seek their vision and allow them to help and plan. If you get buy-in from them, they might be able to get buy-in from those that they associate with in the congregation itself. And just always educate. And I know the word transparency came up before. I think Scott had mentioned that. You know, just let the congregation know why you're exploring this, why you're doing this, what is the purpose of this, what is the goal of this, what are the hopes to get out of this. And you know, you can do this by talking about it from the pulpit. You can place articles in newsletters, morning announcements, emails. You could talk about it in Sunday school, that sort of thing. So yeah, just forget that, you know, don't forget that the church as a whole, the congregation has agency in what we're doing. So make it a collaborative effort like that.
Well, and you know, as a transplant to the UCC, and as a person who grew up in an intensely hierarchical church structure, we have a problem. Well, I'm not going to call it a problem. We have a tendency within the UCC, especially in our German Reformed churches, much more so than in the congregational UCC churches. We have this false dichotomy in leadership because the culture of most of our churches, if you go back a number of decades, was that pastor-led hierarchical structure. I call it the Herr Pastor model, that what the pastor says goes, and nobody questions that. And that's the way it used to be. And especially for our older congregants, a lot of people remember that. But when the UCC was formed in 1957, and we joined with the congregational churches and our polity changed, well, that went and messed everything up. And it's taken a long time for that to have a ripple effect, especially in more rural or more conservative churches. That being said, it's still affected our culture, sometimes without folks even realizing it. And so then we get this phenomenon of, all right, pastor, you're in charge. I want you to do this for me, and I want you to make the decisions until you make a decision that I don't like. And then all of a sudden, there's that congregational polity, and there's a big brouhaha. And so, you know, again, it falls back to agency. You can't have both. Folks need to either allow the pastor to be in control and, you know, accept what is put out by the pastor, or they need to have some sort of ownership, whatever that looks like. Now, obviously, I'm speaking in terms of a perfect world. This isn't actually the way it usually goes down. And yet, as pastors, you know, sometimes we need to call people on their stuff and tell it like it is.
Has my screen changed?
We're
still
on the first one that you shared.
Okay.
If you opened another window, click on that window and it should hopefully come up.
Is it there?
There, it changed.
Okay, so our issue of the UCCMA journal for this summer asked, what is a smaller congregation? And I know that there are a lot of different congregational sizes, but in the Penn Central Conference, a lot of our congregations are smaller congregations, and they're being defined as congregations with 100 members or fewer. And as you can see in the 2020 ribbon up here at the top, that 24%, 24.5% are from 1 to 50 members. 24.5% are from 51 to 100 members. Then 26% from, so you can see that statistically, a lot of our congregations are smaller congregations. And so the statistics are bearing out that the congregation sizes, worship attendance sizes, and so forth have been dropping, but there are some that are doing better. The percentage of UCC congregations by worship attendance, notice that the 1 to 50 size of worship, a size congregation, has gone from 28% to 61% in those who are attending worship. So the small congregation can be a very vital church, a very vital congregation when it comes to worship. And there's good news there, okay? In this issue, we had a piece here by our own Marisa Laviola, Reverend Laviola, our own associate conference minister. And she wrote a wonderful article about alive and thriving, not just surviving. And so there are all kinds of things here. If you join the UCCMA for the 90-day trial, you can read this issue. Recruitment for choirs in small congregations, growing and attracting new people and families. My travels as a multi-church musician. Be a church in mission and ministry, which was done by Reverend Karen Georgia Thompson, who just spoke to us on Monday night. She wrote an article for this issue as well, which is a wonderful article about how she, one of her earlier church service, the churches that she served. Music in a smaller church, Art Zorn, how smaller churches can stand out on social media. All right. Small church ministry isn't less, all kinds of good things. And there's a whole section here on music and worship resources for the smaller church, and things that all kinds of things that you can check into. I just wanted to point that out because there are people addressing these issues, and there are tons of resources out there. We hope that people are not getting discouraged or having sleepless nights over things that they can do something about. Would anybody have any more questions or concerns or that they want to bring up before we bring this to an end?
And I would just say, you guys, everyone knows their context best. So I'm sure you can figure out whether or not you're meeting the needs of your context. So do what needs to be done in the service of where you're at. Don't be discouraged by what everybody else is doing. Don't do the comparison thing, or they're doing that. You don't compare that, because we're not comparing apples to apples, because
Exactly.
Everybody's in a different context. So this is not meant to be discouraging. This is meant to just let you know that everybody's going to do something different and build on any resource that they find that works in their context.
And again, no one is alone. Nobody is out. No man is an island. We are here. Scott and Jeff and I and any of the others, Amelia and anybody else who especially the conference office, can put you in touch with people who can help in situations that need it. Marisa is a wonderful, wonderful resource for smaller congregations and how to make things lively and relevant. So, and she's been doing it for a while. Julia said for tiny churches, it would be wonderful to have some education in choral leadership for choir leaders who don't have formal musical training. That would be a wonderful thing. I know that I would serve as a mentor for anyone. I do it in my college situation at Messiah.
Yep.
I would certainly help with that. Scott probably would, and Jeffrey probably would.
We can make that happen.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
and when we go back to an in-person annual meeting, which I hope we're planning on doing,
right.
let's have a workshop on that
Yeah.
and
But-
bring your musician.
Next year, we will have an in-person annual meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Well, and,
Um,
oh, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, if you want to meet sometime at your church or meet come and see my choir or come and see any of our other groups, we can share. It's a sharing thing.
And I
That's what we're here for.
I also do bell workshops personally myself, especially for people who've had bells in their churches and want to start up a bell choir. I have like a 4-hour workshop that I do to get kind of back to basics, just to learn the ins and outs, just to get a choir started. So I'm happy to do that too.
Awesome. Going back to what you said, Eric, about no man is an island, we're all here for you. Absolutely. So are your other local churches. I would bet my paycheck, as all denominations across the board, especially the main line, are struggling right now. We're going to see more and more collaboration in the years to come. We have to see more collaboration because our denominations aren't going to survive on their own. We're going to have to start working together. So, get to know the makeup of your other local congregations and build relationships. If the church down the street has a thriving children's choir, reach out and see if, hey, would your children's choir be willing to come and sing at my church one Sunday? They might say yes. Be a great field trip for those kids. And it would be great for them to experience worship at a different church. And it would be a wonderful gift for your congregation. Or, think about a choir share if you have a choir, where you flip-flop choirs for a Sunday, or you flip-flop musicians. There are lots of opportunities for collaboration with other congregations.
There might be a chance for you even to sit on one of their rehearsals just to see exactly what it is that they're doing in their context, or they'd be able to share with you how they created their programming and got it started. I also find it helpful sometimes when I'm off, on the Sundays I'm off, if I can, to attend other churches just to see what they're doing. And now we can do that online since most churches are live streaming due to our COVID. So there's always opportunities to look at other services and just to see what other people are doing or learn from that. But just remember your context. We're not going to, sometimes people are doing things in their context that just won't work for your own. So don't get overwhelmed by that either.
Can I read a quick quote by Bruce Epperly in the book that I had suggested? He says, "We believe that small congregations can be God's partners in creating vital and life-transforming worship and music. Small is challenging, but it can also be beautiful." And it's very true. Thank you so much. Amelia, do you want to have the final word?
I would love to have the final word, and I'm going to share a little phrase that I learned too many decades ago in a room just like you're sitting in, Eric. They who sing pray twice. Shall we pray? Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of music. We thank you, gracious God, for the various settings in which we serve. We pray for those of us for whom some of the things we've heard seem completely out of reach. And yet, gracious God, we worship you and we serve in the ways that we can where we are. We thank you, gracious God, for each of the skills represented on this screen. for the collaboration that may be possible, for the things that we heard this night, for the joy, gracious God of music. Thank you for this night, for this faith that we share, and for this time together. Amen. Thank you so very much. I have enjoyed this. I have been challenged by this because I serve in one of those settings where I have no broadband, I have no internet, I have no musicians. I am surrounded by cornfields. However, we worship God as best we can. So thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone. Blessings. Enjoy some of this beautiful spring evening.
Thank
And
you,
if it's
Amelia.
any encouragement, let us not forget that John Calvin and Ulrich Zwingli did not feel as though there should be instruments in worship at all, other than the human voice. So there are churches that by choice choose to sing without an organist.
Yes.
It's not unprecedented. Anything can be done well.
Anything can be done well.
Okay.
Blessings, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.